Good afternoon. Let me know that you are in as I'm trying to send a text. Good afternoon. Welcome to Transformation Thursday, decolonizing our thoughts and theology. Thank you for being. Hey, Roz and Lorma. Good, you put your stuff in the chat. Good for you. Hey, um, okay. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So, on today, we are talking about when is it safe or not safe and not smart to break your silence? Because that's a real thing. When is it not safe and not smart to break your silence? Because breaking the silence, as I said in the beginning, really starts out with yourself. You Many times we're not telling our own self the truth about so many things. We have to break our own silence within ourselves. The other thing is therapy is real and it is necessary. Therapy is real and it is necessary. If you have come on, put something in the comments so I know that you are in the house with us. And so before I get started, there are several questions that people have asked me. One is, where do I get my jewelry? So let's take care of the housekeeping things. Sister Lorma is on. Hey, Shelly, good to see you here. I get all my jewelry from her. She has put in the chat her information. It's paparazzi, and she's put her number in there because y'all know I do recycle black dollars. The other question is who does my makeup? Where do I get it from? So my makeup is from Black-owned companies. Spicy Dark Cosmetics is one. That's where I do my foundation and all of that. And the other is Mented, Mented. They're both online. They are both Black-owned companies. I use them. And who does my makeup? I do. Thank you. And thank you for the compliments. Hey, cousin, Dorinda is on. And so my jewelry you get from Lorma Taylor. She has put her information in the chat. And I am just grateful to be able to recycle black dollars. So today, when is it not smart and when is it unsafe to break your silence? Because that is a real thing. First of all, we heal in community. First and foremost, break your silence within yourself. Within yourself, whatever that means to you, within yourself. And the other is therapy is real and therapy is necessary. So many times we've been told, and our theological premises told us, that therapy is not necessary. You just need Jesus. You will always need Jesus if you are Christian, and you may always need therapy. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Both and work real well. And because we know that therapists are people who have been gifted by God, then let's use the gifts that God has given us. And so you don't break silence if you do not feel safe. Are there times when it's not safe to break silence? Let me say this. Breaking your silence is one thing. Breaking somebody else's silence is another. Tell your story. But when you tell your story, make sure it's yours and no one else's. Are there times when it's not safe to break silence? When it involves domestic violence? Yes. And if you are not sure, please go to the domestic violence hotline and get some help and let them help you learn what to do. And by all means, something that I learned a long time ago, or not so long ago, but I know real well now, do not tell people just leave. You don't know what that just leave has just done. And so when we don't know things and when we don't have lived experiences, we've got to get those helps from other people. If it's domestic violence, the hotline is there. It can give you much information. Hey, Miss Lovey, good to see you on. Hey, Cousin Lynn, glad that you're on. Lorma, I don't know that I can put it in the chat because I can't walk and chew bubblegum at the same time. But my makeup comes from Mented and Spicy Dark Cosmetics. And it looks like Tawana's putting it in there. Those are both Black-owned companies, young Black women. Spicy Dark Cosmetics, I like their foundation. They don't have a lot of red in it. It is made for us, by us, and with us in mind. And Mented is the same thing. And so I use a combination of both of them. So therapy is necessary and therapy is real. I just want to share my journey as I lived out domestic violence. And I'm going to share my story, and it won't be anyone else's story. There were 5 people in my house: my mother, my father, and a brother and a sister. We all lived it out differently. What I know today is that my father grew up in a house that was full of domestic violence. My mother grew up in a house that was full of domestic violence. Hey, Gail, good to see you. And Scott, I see you made it in. And so I grew up in a house where both parents had been products of domestic violence. That was what they knew. That was what they grew up with. And that was what they brought into the marriage. So I grew up in a house where there was a lot of violence. And when it's a lot of violence continually, it becomes normalized. It's what normally happens. So I grew up understanding that a way to get solutions to things was through violence. It was through fighting. It was through violence. I am not knocking anybody. I am not knocking my parents. My parents gave me the best upbringing that they could give me. They gave me what they had. My life experiences taught me certain things because I'm a product of my environment. Now, what I do know is that domestic violence is not always physical. It can be manipulating, it can be emotional, it can be economical. I did not know I was in a domestic violence household. I was in the household I grew up in, and that's what I saw every day, and that's what I knew. As I got older, I grew up in a house where I thought that my mother did not like me nor love me. That's how I grew up. That's what I thought. That's what I felt. It doesn't mean that that's what was. It means that that's what I felt. And that's what I thought. And so I grew up angry, and I always knew how to keep people at a very far distance from me. I was good at that. I knew how to do it. Fast forward into growing up as a woman and remembering that my mother knew how to fight. Fighting was what she knew. But there was one day when, after her divorce, Her and my dad divorced. And at the time when I grew up, people did not get divorced. That was really unheard of. Parents, hey sis, I see you, Denise. Parents, the mother stayed home, took care of the kids. The dad went to work. That's the way it was. That's the way I grew up. We grew up in a predominantly Black community, an all Black community, for the beginning of my life. And in that community, the parents, the mothers shared time. So there were times where we were at one person's house in the neighborhood, another person's house, where the other parents were at somebody else's house. So they took turns, and it was a really healthy community. I grew up in the Lakeview district of San Francisco, very healthy Black community, and very tight. Well, there came a point in time where they passed a law that Blacks could move on the other side of the hill. And my dad wanted to move on the other side of the hill. He was working, he was making good money. The other side of the hill, he was doing it because he could, and that we needed to go to this other neighborhood. So we moved from the Black neighborhood to a predominantly white neighborhood. My father felt like he had made it. This was good for his family. And on all sides, the school district was different and all of that. Well, what he did not bank on was that white folk in San Francisco were no different than white folk down south when they don't want you in their community. My dad had a 1964 white Impala that would get smashed with strawberries and things like that they would throw and then write nigger on the car. He and we learned very fast that when folk don't want you in their community, they're going to make life hard on you. So imagine I had grown up in a community where there was community, and now there is no community. Domestic violence escalates in our house because the frustration is high. We're going to school, we have to walk a path where when we first moved to that community, we were going to a school where we had to walk a path where we literally had to put sticks and whatnot into the bushes on the way home because somebody was going to try to jump us that was white. And we learned, me and my brother particularly, and my sister, learned to fight our way home. And so there is a lot of violence going on. There's violence outside the house. There's violence inside the house. Violence was what I knew. That's how you solve things. That's how you get people off of you. That's what you do. Couple this with the fact that my dad is a minister. And so there is much violence going on in my house. And everybody in my house comes from a violent background. My dad does, my mom does, and now these 3 children do. And me and my siblings were fighting all the time. My parents are fighting all the time. Fighting is all we knew. When I grow up and I leave the house, because I can't wait to get out of the house. I'm 18. I'm getting out of this house because this is crazy. I am never going to be a weak woman. No man is ever going to treat me like this. Da 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 da. Because I got it going on. I got all the answers to life. I'm 18. I know what I am doing. Fast forward, my parents' divorce. And it was in that time, like I said, divorce didn't happen. So there were these women coming to the house saying to my mom things like, how do you lose your husband, a preacher? Preachers don't get divorced. What did you do wrong? My mom could cuss people out. She did for the most part, but she was crying all the time. And went to court, and the judge in court said to my mom, well, I don't really need to know what went on. There must be something wrong with you if a preacher wants to leave you. Very difficult time uh, for my mother, and her abuse toward me became even more than what it had been. And so now uh, I'm dealing with a mother who I never thought liked me anyway, who really don't like me now, and I'm living in the same house with her. I'm dealing with a father who I really don't understand. I am dealing with church that I really don't understand, because I don't understand how I'm caught in this vice grip with a father who's a preacher, a mother who's crying all the time, and me who can't stand nobody in the house. I just, period, flat, can't stand the house, can't stand nobody. I move out. I'm on my life journey. And I kept asking my mother, why do you keep going to the church when you know those folk don't like you? Because see, I did not understand the power of community. I didn't understand that we heal in community. I didn't understand the need for community. I was about me, my, and I. I don't give a doggone what y'all do. All y'all crazy as far as I'm concerned. I go on my life's journey, but I go to church with my mother one Sunday to a special program, and three of her real good friends meet her in front of the church. And they meet her and she greets them, hey, how you doing? Da 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 da. And they said, we need to talk to you. And she's like, okay, what's up? And they said, you're no longer a pastor's wife, and we don't know what you did, but you had to do something wrong in order for your husband to leave you. So you can no longer sit with us, and you can't go any place with us. You can't go to lunches with us anymore. And they talked to her like she was a dog. And I'm waiting for my mom to do what my mom does, which is to fight. And she lets them talk to her like this. And I'm looking at her like, what the heck? I mean, I'm like ready to go. Let's just do this thing. And she turns around and she says, let's go. And I'm like, let's go? You gonna let them punk you like this? We get in the car, we go home. And in my mind, I remember saying, I will never be a weak woman. Nobody will ever do that to me. I saw my mother shrivel back. She continued to go to church. I was done with church. I was done with this whole God thing. I went on to live my life. I didn't understand why she continued doing what she did. Fast forward 40 something years. I had been in ministry for many years. I have pastored churches throughout the country. I know what it is to have leadership say things to you because they don't like you because you're a strong woman. I know what that feels like. I've been dealt that blow. But I moved back to California 2015 after having been in a organization that was for women, by women, part of faith community I now belong to after coming back to Lord, after getting ordained to preach, after getting my degree and all of this, the same organization I grew up in, same organization my parents grew up in, same organization they met each other in, it's the same organization. I'm in this women's organization who dismisses me And I want to say this, it's not the fact, some things are not what people do, it's the way people do what people do. And it was the way in which it was done. This is an organization I had fought hard for. I had become a major officer in, and all of that. I didn't understand why I was being treated. I was hurt when I came back home. I came back to California. Never thought there was going to be an issue. I could do what I had always been doing, but suddenly I become dismissed. I become, I felt abandoned. I felt pushed aside. Uh, I am now 60 plus years old. I am understanding what I did not understand 40 years ago. I am understanding my mother's need for community. Even though it hurt her, she was still in it. I am understanding as a grown woman with a grown child, as a grandmother, the hurt of my mother that she didn't have words for. I am now understanding how it feels when the organization that you have been with, that has been a part of your community, when your community is no longer your community, no longer sees you a part of the community. Now, let me say that for me was not overall. I had a real good friend, still a real good friend, not had, still a very good friend, who said to me, leadership of the organization didn't like me for their own reasons, who would say to me, listen, you my girl, I love you. We're going to have this lunch right here. But you know, if the leader comes out, I'm going to have to get up and leave you because I can't be treated like that. So this was the only person that had the nerve to say to me, here's where I am. You know, so, I mean, she and I going to be sisters forever and a day, right? Other people, I'm sure, felt that they couldn't say anything to me. But I felt pushed aside. I understood the dynamics, and I'm not sure that there was anything that they could have said, but I would have at least liked to have known that our relationship meant something. And at that point, I did not feel that it did. But as I lived through my experiences, I understood my mother's experiences 40 years before. So now, some 40 years later, we have gone through, my mother could not be there for me when I had breast cancer. 40 years later, I understand that. But earlier, I didn't. My mother tried to be there for me when I had upper palate cancer. 20 years later, I understand, but 20 years before, I didn't. I understood 40 years later that it wasn't that she did not like me. It was that she didn't have words. She didn't have community. She didn't know how to say what she wanted to say. She didn't know how to say what she felt. She didn't have the options that I had. So after many years of being estranged from my mother, I broke the silence. Now, many people would say, she's the mother, she ought to break the silence. I all I know is I needed to break the silence because now I'm a grown enough woman, not only to understand heartbreak, not only to understand disappointment, but I understand that you were molded in domestic violence. I understand now that you thought your marriage was going to be forever, even though it may have been unhealthy. Unhealthy was what people did. All you knew was what you knew. I understand now that it wasn't that you did not like me. It was what I represented. Because when I went into the ministry, that's where all communication stopped. Because I now represent the same people that have hurt you. I now represent the same body that has hurt you. I just represent hurt to you. It didn't have anything to do with me. It had everything to do with what I represented. But I'm grown enough now to understand this. I've been through therapy. I've gotten my healing. And now the same word that I preach about love, I got to figure out, why is it that when the Bible says love never fails, how do I make love not fail here? So I break the silence. I call my mom. I say, hey, Mom, this is Carolyn. Carolyn who? Your daughter. Oh, I got a daughter named Carolyn. Yes. Oh, really? Well, what you want? I called to see how you doing. Somebody tell you I wasn't doing good? For a whole year, that's what I got. But I never stopped calling. Why did I not stop calling? Because if I put myself in her shoes, I understand that I don't know that I can trust you. I can't take any more hurt in my life. And I certainly can't take it from one more person who is supposed to be able to love me. I'm not going to take no more. And I get it. I get it. And so I call. I don't call every day, no, because I also have enough love for you not to make you have to endure that every day. So I call a couple of times a month. After a year, I call, I say, hey, Mom, this is Carolyn. Hey, Carolyn, how you doing? And then now I'm the one that's suspicious. I'm looking like, okay, is this going to go like this? I'm like, Mom, I'm doing good. I've called to see how you do. I'm doing good. Her conversation is guarded with me because she just needs to know that I'm calling because I care. She just needs to know that I'm calling with love. That's all she needs to know. She doesn't want to know, am I going to dredge up the past? Am I going to ask her questions that she can't answer? All of that. And I don't need her to answer nothing from me. I'm grown enough now to know how pain hurts. I'm grown enough now to know what it is when the community that you thought you had, you no longer have. I'm grown enough now to know when your friends are no longer your friends, and it may not be that they don't like you, they just don't know how to communicate with you. They don't know how to break their silence with you. I'm grown enough now to know. But you, my mom, and forgiveness for me looks like this. I want those who are listening to know this is my story. And if you're not at that place, you heard me say it took 40 years, 40 plus years. So I'm not telling you this is what you have to do. I'm telling you this is what I had to do for me. And so I was able to break my silence. And in breaking my silence, I knew that my mom was closer to the grave than she was to the womb. And so when I broke my silence and we were able to have very heartfelt conversations that had nothing to do with the past, not a thing, that the past was not brought up. There was a point in time where she was in the hospital, and because I come from a very dysfunctional family, my sister and I have no relationship, and she had the relationship with my mother. So she had my mother's say in my mother's care. So when they moved my mother from one hospital to another, I didn't know where my mother was. And my sister was giving me, she was telling me, oh, call this number. She's at this place. I called, she wasn't there. I said, where is she? Then finally I said, you know what? I'm not chasing nobody down. And I'm not going to keep playing this game with you where you keep giving me numbers where you know she's not. And so I kept calling my mother's phone until finally I got somebody who could tell me where my mother was. And And when I talked to my mother, I said, when you do not hear from me in any length of time, it means I have no idea where you are. And I just left it at that. Just before my mother died, two things happened. One is I called her the day before Mother's Day. She died a couple of years ago. And I just said, "Hey mom, how you doing?" And she just sounded real sad. And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "All I want is some ice cream and cake. Can you make that happen?" I said, "Mom, I live 400 miles away. Even if I could make it happen, the ice cream gonna be melted by the time it gets to you." But I remembered that I might live 400 miles away, but I know some folk who live in Sacramento, California. I called one of my daughters in ministry and I said, "I need you to do something." I told her what I needed. She said, "I got this." She went to the store. She got the stuff. I gave her my mom's address. I told her, "Call me when you get to the parking lot." She did. And I called my mom, just talking with her. She has no idea that ice cream and cake is on the way. She brought her ice cream. She brought her cake. My mom laughed. She giggled. And I had already told her, now, look, my mom can be a little rough. So just, do what you need to do. Just handle it. And so she handled it. Got my mom ice cream and cake. For the first time in God knows 20, 30 years, my mother called me the day after Mother's Day. And she said, "Thank you for making this the best Mother's Day I've ever had." I knew that my mother was not going to be with us much longer after that. But I was blessed to have had that kind of conversation and that kind of interaction with her. It was something that she needed, something that I needed, something that I could hold on to for the rest of my life. When her time was coming and my niece called and said, um, "Grandma's in the hospital. Are you going to come up here?" And I said, "No, I don't need to come up." And she said, "Well, they're talking about putting her on a machine." I said, your grandmother is not going to let y'all put her on a machine." Uh, my mother made it so that I could have conversations with her without my sister and still allow my sister to be in charge. My sister was in charge when my mother passed. I had to move heaven and earth to try to find out when her service was going to be and all of those things. But I had done my job. I had done what I needed to do for me and her. As far as, does love ever fail? Well, no, it doesn't, but sometimes it takes a long time to get there. We never had to hash over the past. We never had to do that. It was not necessary for me to say, why was this done? Why? It wasn't necessary. I lived life. Some things you cannot address until you have lived. There are some things you cannot understand until you have lived. There are some places you can't break the silence because you don't know how. There are things that you see that happen. And when I was in the ministry and thinking of those people who did not come to my aid and stopped talking to me and stuff, it wasn't their assignment to say anything. But sometimes what you can say is when you see a person hurting or when you see that something has been done, sometimes it's just putting your name and your phone number on a piece of paper and saying, "If you ever want to talk, here's my number," and just walk away. You don't have to say nothing. When it's a domestic violence issue, and I used to be the one who would say, "Well, I don't understand why they don't just leave." That was because I didn't understand my own experiences with domestic violence until I was long out of it and had gotten my own therapy. Sometimes you hear people say, I didn't realize I was in domestic violence until I heard somebody talk about domestic violence. And I've heard people say, how could they not know? You could ask that question because you haven't been there. And when you haven't been there, you cannot speak to there. And so sometimes you can't break your own silence and you can't break nobody else's. And sometimes it's not safe. And sometimes you just got to live life. The old folk used to say it this way, baby, just keep living. If you haven't been there, you're likely to get there at some point. It is not my desire that any of you would have to live out any type of domestic violence. But before you counsel somebody who's in it and you have not been in it yourself, go get some help. Go find out from somebody. Tawana, I think, posted the domestic violence hotline, and find out from somebody first before you try to counsel somebody on someplace you've never been. Before you tell somebody who has lost a loved one, don't you need to move on now? Clearly, you have not lost a loved one. So before you tell somebody when their time of grief ought to be over, walk in their shoes first. So sometimes you can't break a silence because the silence has not been broken in you. And sometimes you can't break the silence because it's not safe and it's not smart. And sometimes you can't break it because it's not your story. Tell your story to yourself first. Grow up in yourself first. Some of us have been holding on to things, and I have said to people many a times, you holding on to stuff, and you grown, and you a parent, and you really want your child to be holding on to some of the stuff that you've done. I don't know your story, so I'm not trying to tell you how to get through it. But I do know that therapy works well for a whole lot of people. And I do know that if you're in a place that you were in growing up and that you have not been able to get through, yes, Jesus loves you. And yes, Jesus has power. And therapy will help you understand that love just a little bit better. The old folk used to say it this way, you'll understand it better by and by. There are times when breaking the silence is not smart, nor is it safe. And there are times when breaking the silence is you needing to learn how to tell your story and not everybody else's. And then there are times when breaking the silence is silence itself. Shoving somebody a phone number and saying, just concerned about you. If you need to talk, please call. Or I just felt like I wanted to give you this. I don't know if you'll ever need to use it, but if you ever feel like you need to, please don't hesitate to call. I tell people if you need to call me in the middle of the night, I'll be here for you. What I'm not going to try to do is tell you to do something that I've never lived before. If you are in a domestic violence situation, I'm not going to tell you, all you need to do is leave. When you leave, give me a call. Because I've heard people tell the people that. I want to say to you, call the domestic violence hotline and let them tell you how to break your silence. There are many ways and many opportunities and many situations. This is only one. We serve a God who is mighty. We serve a God who is wonderful. We serve a God who is faithful. And we serve a God who is loving. I was blessed that God allowed me to, some 40 years later, to be able to understand my own journey, so that I could understand my mother's and break the silence before she passed. I was blessed. Other people don't have that kind of time, but there is still healing under the blood of Jesus. There is still healing to be had. And some of it has to be done in therapy, which is community. I understood the need for community and the power of community. And so when one community was no longer serving love, then I asked God to show me where love was being served. And I was able to go to the next table. When love is no longer being served at your table, there is another table. Community is necessary. We were not called to be individuals. We were not called to heal by ourselves. We are called to heal in community. And community can be many and it can be few. And it can be just you and one other person. But we were called to heal in community. And I thank God for the community that I have. I thank God for you being here today. You being on this broadcast becomes part of my community. And we're in community together and learning together. And so I just want to share with you that before you break your silence, break it in yourself, break it in therapy, and let God show you how to move forward. May God bless you. May God keep you. Wait, I have one other thing I need to do, and let me do this here. If you want to support this ministry, this is a way in which you can do it. It does cost money to put on the broadcast. And if you are wanting to support, people have asked me, when are you going to put it up? There it is. And we appreciate any support that you give to this ministry. Well, thank you for rolling with me. Thank you for being here. Transformation Thursday, when it's not smart nor safe to break your silence. Look forward to being with you on next Thursday. May God bless you and may God keep you.